Harry Clifton was woken by the sound of a phone ringing. He was in the middle of a dream, but couldn't remember what it was about. Perhaps the insistent metallic sound was just part of his dream. He reluctantly turned over and blinked at the little phosphorescent green hands on the bedside clock. 6:43 a.m. He smiled. Only one person would consider calling him at that time in the morning. He picked up the phone and murmured in an exaggeratedly sleepy voice, "Good morning, my darling." There was no immediate response, and for a moment Harry wondered if the hotel operator had put the call through to the wrong room. He was about to replace the receiver when he heard sobbing. "Is that you, Emma?" "Yes," came the reply. "What's the matter?" he asked soothingly. "Sebastian is dead." Harry didn't reply immediately, because he now wanted to believe he was still dreaming. "How can that be possible?" he eventually said. "I spoke to him only yesterday." "He was killed this morning," said Emma, clearly only able to manage a few words at a time. Harry sat bolt upright, suddenly wide awake. "In a car accident," continued Emma between sobs. Harry tried to remain calm as he waited for her to tell him exactly what had happened. "They were travelling up to Cambridge together." "They," repeated Harry. "Sebastian and Bruno." "Is Bruno still alive?" "Yes, but he's in a hospital in Harlow, and they're not sure if he'll make it through the night." Harry threw back the blanket and placed his feet on the carpet. He was freezing and felt sick. "I'll take a taxi to the airport immediately and catch the first flight back to London." "I'm going straight to the hospital," said Emma. She didn't add anything else, and Harry wondered for a moment if the line had gone dead. Then he heard her whisper, "They need someone to identify his body." Emma replaced the receiver, but it was some time before she could gather enough strength to stand up. She eventually made her way unsteadily across the room, clinging on to several pieces of furniture, like a sailor in a storm. She opened the drawing-room door to find Marsden standing in the hall, his head bowed. She had never known their old retainer to show the slightest emotion in front of a member of the family, and hardly recognized the shrunken figure now clutching on to the mantelpiece for support. The usual mask of self-composure had been replaced with the cruel reality of death. "Mabel has packed an overnight case for you, madam," he stammered, "and, if you'll allow me, I'll drive you to the hospital." "Thank you, Marsden. That's most considerate of you," Emma said, as he opened the front door for her. Marsden took her arm as they made their way down the steps towards the car. The first time he'd ever touched the mistress. He opened the door, and she climbed in and sank into the leather upholstery, as if she was an old lady. Marsden switched on the ignition, shifted the gear lever into first, and set out on the long journey from the manor house to the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow. Emma suddenly realized she hadn't rung her brother or sister to let them know what had happened. She would call Grace and Giles this evening, when they were more likely to be alone. This was not something she wanted to share when strangers might be present. And then she felt a piercing pain in her stomach, as if she'd been stabbed. Who was going to tell Jessica that she would never see her brother again? Would she ever be the same cheerful little girl who ran around Seb like an obedient puppy, tail wagging with unbridled adoration? Jessica must not hear the news from someone else's lips, which meant that Emma would have to return to the manor house as quickly as possible. Marsden pulled into the forecourt of the local garage, where he usually filled up on a Friday afternoon. When the petrol pump attendant spotted Mrs. Clifton sitting in the back seat of the green Austin A30, he touched the rim of his cap. She didn't acknowledge him, and the young man wondered if he'd done something wrong. He filled the tank and then lifted the bonnet to check the oil. Once he'd slammed the bonnet back down, he touched the rim of his hat again. But Marsden drove off without a word, not parting with the usual sixpence. "What's got into them?" murmured the young man as the car disappeared.